Well, one thing that I wanted to ask you about, um, going way back to where you said you're coaching things, that you do the board and the minister every other month, and then the board, is that without the minister?
Okay, so all right, so let me say it this way. I'm coaching the minister every other week, and the minister and the board, or the minister and the board president every month.
Okay.
And so I have continuity with them, and it builds upon, each session begins to amplify the effect. So what happens is that the minister, and in each coaching session, it is the responsibility of the client to bring to me what they want to talk about, or what they want to process or deal with. And then so we work with whatever is emerging in the ministry in the context of their understanding how the mission-centric practice differs from what they would normally intend to do otherwise. So it gives them an option to be able to begin to integrate some of the things that I've already been talking about, that I'm now coaching them to implement without necessarily having to do any on-site visits at all. I'm moving towards doing all distance coaching and only having very few on-site visits necessary in order to be able to move things forward. There are still a couple of on-site processes that are important, such as the genogram activity. And until I get other people trained to do it the way I do it, I need to do it myself. So, but other than that, I'm moving towards an all distance coaching model that is much more affordable and easier to work on for everybody. All right, Margie, you had your hand up again.
Yes, please. In the organizations that you've been coaching, would you define them as essentially healthy organizations, or have you worked with any groups, any churches where there's a real breakdown between the minister and the board, or the board versus the community, that they're not in sync? Okay, yeah, good address that question, please.
Okay, so I'm not doing peacemaking or conflict management anymore. I don't do that. So that's no longer my brand. I'm only interested in helping ministry leaders evolve. And so they have to be at a certain level of capacity to evolve, right? So, but at the same time, there has to be a certain amount of discomfort if they're to evolve as well. So for the most part, most of my clients are in some form of decline, in some form of not enough, significant not enough in some cases. And one client I have, there could easily be a coup that would want the minister to move on. And so in some ways, that won't happen while I'm coaching. And in many ways, it's likely that if everything goes as it's headed, they'll evolve out of that whole dynamic of making somebody the matter with them. But suffice to say that it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned, other than there has to be a kind of a willingness on the part of the whole system for the whole system program to work. And it doesn't matter so much with respect to the ministerial leadership. But if there's a significant conflict between the minister and the board, my coaching program wouldn't really be appropriate, because they really need to deal with their stuff, and I don't have the desire to do that work anymore. So.
Oh, Gary, a follow on.
Okay.
Are any of your churches in transition, that space between permanent spiritual leaders?
Yeah. So one of my clients is. And the facilitator of their process is here on the call right now, and David can comment if you like to. So when I have a client, they give me permission to use them as a reference. So David's involved in my coaching program, although I'm not coaching the board yet at this time. So I'm just working with David as a transitional minister, and I'm partnering with David, at least from my end, hopefully equipping him to replicate my work in other ministries down the road. So,
David, could you say something about how being coached by Gary is making a difference in the transition work you're doing with Overland Park as opposed to like your previous ones?
So the reason that I'm having Gary coach is because this group in particular had expressed an interest to become a mission-centric church. And of course, they don't have a concept of what that really means. And I see that that's a necessity going forward with ministries just in general. And I needed to become clearer what that is for an organization. And so Gary's very instrumental in that. So in part, the practical application of Gary being coach is that a couple of things that I would normally do early on in the process in transition, we postponed and put off, that being Hopkoff, honoring our past, creating our future, where we look at the history and the reoccurring shadow of the church as it arises, and then put something into place that might speak into how we are different going forward when those shadows arise, and all. And so Gary's observation was that his experience indicated that that was not a helpful process unless there was a certain level of individuals' emotional maturity in the congregation, and that needed to be put in place first. So I took that off the plate, and we're first doing a series of Q processes, trying to, the first one starts this month, and then we'll have 2 or 3 more throughout the year, trying to enroll as many people from the congregation into that individual shadow work and healthier way of being, before we come back around maybe next fall or next winter doing a hot cough, trying to lay some groundwork first so that people, when they go through that process, they can do it from that non-anxious presence, if you will, where it's not all about them, but it's always this interesting. So that, in a very practical way, has been part of my experience in the last couple of months. So go ahead.
So are you doing the Q process yourself? Are you teaching it yourself?
This first time I'm having an outside facilitator come in, because I'm signed up and will be going through the Q process coaching training, this winter, spring.
Yeah.
So that I'll have that background, and then the processes later on that we do, I'll probably lead those rather than bringing somebody in from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I found that when I went to Hamilton, I had to spend at least the first 6 months. I called it more gaining trust, but it was about increasing the spiritual and emotional maturity. I didn't use the Q process at that. Well, no, let me rephrase that. I had developed my own version of Eye of the Storm that was mostly Q process, because we did shadow work, and that was one of the first things that I presented. And from that, kept referencing it all the time. And that I think that was what made the huge difference. I didn't do Hop Cough until, May. After I'd been there from November. It took me a long time to do that.
So you should know that for when I talk about the genogram activity, it's the same. It's similar to the process that you're describing, but So here's the difference, and that is that we basically finish the storytelling process with recognizing the unintended consequences of what happens when we make our story about the comings and goings of spiritual leaders. Mm-hmm. And that the ahas that the community begins to notice as they kind of observe the genogram grid, as they populate that grid with respect to the prouds and the sorries and the unresolved issues and the intensity of the transitions, as they're able to see the legacy of hurt and distrust and all that kind of get passed down from era to era. And then they also we also facilitate them understanding that we have to be willing to create something that's not tethered to any of the story. That part of our journey out of any kind of victimhood or any kind of sense that our life is against us is that we ultimately have to change our story. Mm-hmm. And so from this moment on, we have to make our story about the fulfillment of our purpose, not who the minister is. And so we do the genogram activity every year now at Unity Spiritual Center at our annual meeting. And the only thing that we have to do, it only takes 10 minutes, is we go over our prouds and our sorries. But it's about our prouds and sorries with respect to the fulfillment of our purpose, as opposed to Gary and Jane did this, Gary and Jane did that. So the other side of this is that what gets generated is the church's cue card and the church's shadow card, which replaces the church's core values. Because in the course of doing the genogram activity, I discern their cue card. I take the flip chart paper away and I come back with their cue card and their shadow card. And I also get them to choose qualities. I do that exercise about what the church stands for. Mm-hmm. And I get them to put dots on, not on the dots of the values that fix the past, but on the values that pull you into the future. And they pick a total different series of values based upon having done the genogram activity and then proposed, okay, now we're going to create something different. What values do you want? And so where heretofore they might have picked the value of transparency because of their distrust of their ministry leaders, they choose not to choose transparency, but they choose ownership and partnership instead. Because that is an overarching principle that when we have a true ownership partnership relationship, transparency is not an issue. Mm-hmm. It's a part of how we are together. And so this is what the traditional transition ministry process does not do in the context of helping to evolve the church out of its story. And so that's why I've asked David to postpone his facilitation of that, because I want to teach David how to facilitate what I do that has that result, because it totally shifts. And there's no healing circle. There's no having to kiss and make up, because by the time that people have been through the cue process, they know that their stuff is their projection. Mm-hmm. And there's no making somebody the matter with us when we do the genogram activity, because anybody who wants to do it from that context will find that it's not a pleasant experience for them. And so there's a different context for telling the story when there's a different reason behind why we're doing the storytelling process. Not to find out what happened or what is, but to release our story.